right. So we're going to discuss three topics for this meeting, which are the conceptual or theoretical framework, the hypothesis and assumptions of the study, and definition of terms. So this is the last virtual meeting that we're going to discuss the lessons in this subject. So starting next week, I will give you all the time, including the virtual schedule to we call that to make your research paper, right? Right. Lesson objectives. At the end of the lessons, the student can formulate the conceptual or theoretical framework of the study, construct a diagram representing the conceptual or theoretical framework of the study, differentiate the type of hypothesis, define the important terms used in study, and differentiate between conceptual definition and operational definition. Right. Even carefully collected results can be misleading if the underlying context of assumptions is wrong, according to Heinrich 1984. So, in conducting research, it's very important that you know how to provide logical assumptions because wrong assumptions can lead to wrong analysis of your paper or of your study, even wrong process of conducting your studies. It's very important. You need to know how to connect all the variables or all the concepts that you need to deal with in your research. Right. A framework is similar to a skeleton. It is a basic structure or frame of reference which is designed to support or enclose something. So basically, when we say framework, it's like the skeletal system of your research. It will show the design of your whole research. It's like the process that you're going to conduct in terms of the variables that you're going to deal with in your paper. Framework, the abstract, logical structure of meaning that guide the development of a study. All frameworks are based on the identification of key concepts and the relationship of these concepts. So, as what I have mentioned, in making the framework of your research, it's very important that you need to have good assumptions in your research. When you say assumptions, they are very important in conducting a research because we cannot avoid prejudgments when we start conducting a research. So, which means that a researcher needs to possess good assumptions. We have to test or prove those prejudgments. So we need to be very careful. And when we are sure of our assumptions, the variables that we need to consider in conducting a research, we can create or formulate the right framework for our study. Okay. When we say framework, it is the logical structure of how the concepts or variables in your research can be related to each other. So, meaning this is the part of research wherein you're going to connect or relate the variables, concepts in your research. You need to identify the factors or concepts in your study, and then you identify how you're going to logically connect them. Okay. When we say concept, it describes the names, objects, and phenomena. Example, pain, anxiety, etc. And when we say variable, more specific and measurable frameworks can be derived from related concepts and existing theories. Okay. When we say concept, it's the call that. It's like the topic. It's like the major topic of your research. Say variable, it refers to the what do you call that? The indicators which describe the concept. just like this one. I'll show you examples of the previous research studies. So, which means that when you say concept, it is general, while we call that the variable is specific. Halimbawa, itong multiple intelligence. Oh, wait lang. Let's find another one. So, okay. For example, this one. This study, the title of the study is Personality Traits and Game Design Preferences of the Gamers in Davao City. So when you identify the concept based on the title, the concepts are personality traits and game design preferences. But in order to narrow down the variables of your research, meaning yung specific indicators, each variable, each concept, about sa personality traits, the variables are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. While the variables in game design preferences, sensation, fantasy, narrative, challenge, fellowship, discovery, expression, and submission. So that's how we're going to identify or determine the concept and variable. The concept, it's the general topic, while when you say variable, the variable is the specific indicators of the concept. It's it's very necessary when you write your research as a conceptual framework that you need to provide the specific variables sa inyong concepts because there are a lot of theories that can be used for your study. Halimbawa, ito sa personality traits. There are a lot of theories that can be used or that can refer to personality traits. So in this case, sa study, yung ginamit dito is yung yung 5-factor model na personality traits. Sa game design, ang ginamit is yung MDA or Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics Framework. So it's very important that you need to specify the variables under the concept sa study ninyo. Right. When we say theoretical framework consists of interrelated theories. A theory explains a phenomenon or an abstract generalization that systematically explains the relationship among given phenomena for purposes of explaining, predicting, and controlling such phenomena. Itong conceptual theoretical framework, although they are distinct, but they are interrelated. The variables, the concepts that you presented in your conceptual framework should be connected or should be expressed in your theoretical framework. Kasi sa theoretical framework, you're going to provide your theories. So how can you provide the specifications of your concepts or the variables? That would be based on your theory. Kasi ito like, let's go back to the sample. So sa theoretical framework, yung ginamit is yung 5-factor model at saka itong MDA or Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics framework. So dapat mag-reflect siya dire sa inyong conceptual framework. Itong theoretical framework, it's the narrative of the theories that you're going to use. Pero ito namang conceptual framework, it's the paradigm or the model on how the variables or theories are connected. So it shows the possible relationship between or among the variables in your research. The theoretical framework provides the ideas and approaches to viewing and gathering knowledge, which provide the basic ways of addressing a topic. So which means that your theoretical framework should provide the possible ways on how to fill in the gap of your research or answer the problem. Kasi dapat connected siya din sa sa statement of the problem ninyo. Go back to the sample. Since ito yung statement of the problem ng study, what are the personality traits of the gamers in Davao City? What are the game design preferences of the gamers in Davao City? And then, third one, is there a significant relationship between the personality traits and game design preferences of the gamers in Davao City? So, based on the statement of the problem, ganito dapat yung itsura ng conceptual framework. Since you want to identify if there's a relationship between the two, yung independent variable mo is yung personality traits. So dependent variable sa game design preference, you're trying to identify if the personality traits of the gamers can affect the game design preferences, their game design preferences. So meaning connected itong theoretical framework, conceptual framework, and then itong statement of the problem. Kasi yung theoretical framework mo should be used in order to answer the problem in your study, which are expressed in statement of the problem. Okay? The theory provides a point of focus for attacking the unknown in a specific area. If a relationship is found between two or more variables, a theory should be formulated to explain why the relationship exists. So it's very important that you need to choose the right theory that can be used for your study. Kasi itong theoretical framework and conceptual framework, you need to contextualize the whole study of the process that you're going to conduct. And what's the best or what's the theory that can suit your research problem? So your conceptual framework will also be used in order to determine or can be used to prove or challenge the hypothesis in your research. Halimbawa ito. You can check the samples in Schoology. Right, a conceptual framework is a visual or written product that explains either graphically or in narrative form the main things to be studied, the key factors, concepts, or variables, and the presumed relationships among them. So what I have said, itong conceptual framework and theoretical framework are interconnected. Conceptual framework, it's the visual representation of the theories in your paper, as well as the contextualization of your study and how the variables in your research are interconnected or can be correlate. The most important thing to understand about the conceptual framework is that it is primarily a conception of model of what is about there that you plan to study and of what is going on with these things and why. The tentative theory of the phenomena that you are investigating. So what I have said, your conceptual framework should reflect your statement of the problem because your conceptual framework can be used in order to address or answer the problems that you want to answer or address in your research. The conceptual framework is consists of concepts that are placed within the logical and sequential design. It's not that you're going to choose which theories, which variables, which concepts you're going to put in your conceptual framework. Dapat logical siya. And it's not just you're going to place boxes and then place arrows in order to show the visual representation of your theories, but you need to think logically how these theories are connected. Meron siyang meaning yung mga arrows if line lang siya or may kung line lang siya or may tawag doon. Yung sa point ganun sa arrow, basta yan siya, may meaning yan siya. This is based on specific concepts and propositions derived from empirical observation and intuition, which means that your conceptual framework will also reflect your observations. It's not just you observe right away or meaning just provide what's your observation. Dapat meron kang empirical basis or it should be scientific, meaning there's logic behind your observations. Theories may likewise be deduced from conceptual framework. As what I have mentioned earlier, the conceptual framework and theoretical framework are interconnected. Sa magagamit din itong theoretical framework at conceptual framework when you write your related literature. Like for example, dito sa study, yung concepts niya about personality traits at game design preferences. At yung variables niya, gigamit niya sa study is ang 5-factor model and MDA. So pag abot sa review of rated literature, since the concepts of this study are personality traits and game design preferences, first is you need to provide rated literature about personality traits. So, second is yung personality traits. Since yung variables are specific theory na gigamit, so yung 5-factor model, thus you need to provide related literature about 5-factor model. Ito siya. So we have openness, conscientiousness, etc. Next is yung MDA framework. And you need to specify, di ba may specifications yon. What are the indicators? Specific variables ng MDA. So sensation, fantasy. So it's very important that you need to find related literature even though the literature that you have found are not the authors. Hindi yung author ng original na framework na kinunan mo. Like for example, ito si MDA framework. The proponent of this framework was Unique, LeBlanc, and Zubik. Pero, pagdating sa kung indicators na specific indicators, yung sensation, it's fine that if you will find related literature which are not authored by the proponent of your theory. Halimbawa, ito si Salen and Zimmerman. They're not the proponent of your theory sa MDA, pero pwede siya when you include other related literature studies. And I just would like to remind everybody kasi mostly dun sa mistake ninyo last school year yung sa qualitative research, most of you dun pagdating sa citation pala, nagkalimbawa when you use the study halimbawa kini siya. For example, the main author of this specific related literature is Maloney. Kaya lang, hindi siya, ang tawag doon, primary source niyo. He is not your primary source. Secondary source na lang si Airamo, 2011. Don't forget to cite Airamo even though Airamo just cited Maloney sa kanyang study. But since yung study yung related literature, nakita niyo lang sa study na Airamo even though he's not the main author of this specific related literature, it's very important na i-cite niyo siya. Kaya pagdating sa references, hindi na si Maloney yung i-cite ninyo, kundi si Airamo na. It's like this one. Ito. Pagdating dito, it's not necessary to include Maloney anymore sa references kasi secondary lang yung source niyo. Yung primary source niyo is si Airamo. I forgot to include this one. So let's continue. Okay. These are the purposes of conceptual and theoretical framework: to clarify concepts and propose relationships among concepts. So as what I have mentioned earlier, one of the uses of conceptual framework is to show what are the possible relationships among the concepts and variables in your study. To provide a context for interpreting study findings. To explain observations to encourage theory development that is useful to practice. It's very important that you need to know how to contextualize your research. So in order for you to do that, you need to clarify that in your theoretical and conceptual framework. Kasi nililimit ng conceptual and theoretical framework nyo kung ano lang yung i-deal nyo sa research ninyo. As what I have said, there are a lot of existing theories about personality traits and game design preferences. So, in order for you to specify, to limit the variables that you're going to conduct in your study, it should be expressed in your conceptual and theoretical framework. The result of a clear understanding of conceptual or theoretical framework is a diagrammatic presentation of the study called the paradigm. Excuse me. So, your conceptual framework is the model of your whole research. It can be used in order for you to come up with logical analysis of your research. And we have various kinds of conceptual framework. First is itong IPO model or input process output. This model is largely used when the research attempts to isolate the factor or major variable that causes the problem, subject, or phenomenon under investigation. Itong IPO model, it's necessary when you want want to create something out of the research. Kaya siya tinawag na input, process, output. Yung input, it's the first variable that you're going to deal with in your paper. Itong process, paano mo i-conduct or i-process itong input, and out of the process can result into something, which is yung output mo. Okay, halimbawa, ito. The input in this specific framework is the inventory of in-service training activities, and the process, yung feedback on in-service training programs, participants in perception satisfaction, teacher factors, teaching efficacy, job satisfaction, attitude towards the teaching profession, and student performance. And the output, the proposed enhanced professional development model. So for trying to understand this specific model framework, this specific study, gusto niya makita if yung in-service training activities are effective. And how can you measure the effectivity of the in-service training activities? So there are processes that you're going to consider, or the variables that you're going to consider in order to determine if the in-service training activities are effective. Halimbawa, itong participants' perception and satisfaction, or feedback galing sa in-service training, and teacher factors, and yung student performance. So out of this process, you can come up with an enhanced professional development. So meaning yung purpose itong output ay para ma-enhance ni si in-service training activities, para makita kung unsa pa ang kailangan para mapa-improve ang in-service training activities, teachers. But before you come up with an enhanced professional development, there are certain things that you need to consider in order to measure the effectivity of in-service training activities. That can be done in the process part of IPO. Itong feedback, teacher factors, and student performance. Okay. Next one, we have IVDV, or independent variable or dependent variable. This model is used in experimental-based studies. The questions are higher order and classified a situation relating, meaning, we say situation relating as what we have discussed in our previous lesson about statement of the problem. IVDV model can be used in order to prove or challenge relationships among concepts or variables. Kagaya ng pinakita ko kanina. Ito. This is an example of independent variable and dependent variable. So it shows the possible relationship between the variables present in the study. Halimbawa ito. So independent variables like career guidance activities, if it can affect the students' enhanced employability. So under the variable, under the career guidance activities, there are existing variables that are used for this study, like decision-making, opportunity or self-awareness, and transition learning. These factors being used in order to relate or connect the students' enhanced employability. So again, we say independent, it shows relationship among the variables in the study. Next one, we have PC model, or predictor criterion variable. This model is used when relating and assessing the influence between two or more variables. Studies that focus on relationships, associations, differences, and impacts will benefit from this model. So, say predictor criterion variable if you want to predict possible future results. Kaya halimbawa, ito. Teaching competence of senior high school teachers if maka-affect ba siya sa level of performance of ABM students? For example, under the teaching competence, knowledge level, pedagogical level, classroom management. If they can affect possible performances, future performances among ABM students. And yung indicators in order to know the possible results of the teaching competence of senior high school teachers, ito yung academic grades, behavioral attributes, and peer evaluation result. Meaning this one shows possible future results. Next, we have P model. This model is used in research studies that propose a program or any intervention measure. It fits the situation producing level of questioning. Okay. If you want to implement something, but before you can implement a program, you have to undergo a research first in order to come up with an efficient and effective program. And you can use P model when conducting that kind of specific research. Okay, halimbawa, if you want to implement faculty development program, you need to undergo the process first. First is, halimbawa, itong sa predictor criterion, it can be progressed. It can be used into P model. If out of that, if the results of this specific study that you want to use for a program that you want to implement. Halimbawa, yung teaching competence ng senior high school teachers at saka level of performance can create a program. Diba? Predictor, ito yung predictor ninyo. Teaching competence. Yung criterion, ito yung level of performance studies. So since it's your purpose to improve the teaching competence of the teachers, you need to conduct faculty development program. It's different from It's different from IPO, although meron silang they have similarities, but kasi itong itong specific na model na to, itong P model, is that meron siyang predictor at saka criterion na ginamit. Nag-progress lang siya. Then we have POM, or Proposed Original Model. This model is used when the researcher presents an original paradigm. The requirement is that it must be scientific. So if your study is new in terms of the methodology, in terms of the methods that you're going to conduct, you can present your own model as long as the logical connections of the relationships among the variables in your research are being clarified, not ambiguous. Kailangan klaro lang siya ang pag-present sa model if your model is original. Next one, the hypothesis and assumptions of the study. A hypothesis is a tentative prediction about the relationship between two or more variables in a population under study. It translates a research question into a prediction of expected outcomes. It's a hypothesis, after you observe something, you formulate a question or something that can be proven or not. Then yung hypothesis. And your hypothesis can be used in order to formulate your statement of the problem or the research questions. Halimbawa, ito yung hypothesis niya is there significant relationship between personality traits and game design preferences? So before you come up with identifying or describing the relationship between the variables, you need first identify the personality traits and game design preferences. After you identify the major variables in your study, then you can proceed to your proving the hypothesis, proving or challenging your hypothesis. Then we have different types of hypotheses. We have simple hypothesis and complex hypothesis based on the numbers of variables in your study. For simple hypothesis, it is the one in which there exists relationship between two variables. One is called independent variable or cause, and the other is dependent variable or effect. So itong simple hypothesis, you can label your hypothesis if your study has only one independent variable and one dependent variable. Okay, for example, smoking leads to cancer. The independent variable in this specific example is smoking, while dependent variable is cancer. So there's only one independent variable and one dependent variable. The higher ratio of unemployment leads to crimes. Itong unemployment, ito yung independent, crimes, ito yung dependent variable. There are two variables in the study. There are two major variables in the study. That's simple hypothesis. Ito namang complex hypothesis is the one in which as relationship among variables exist. Meaning there are more than one yung independent and dependent variables. Example, smoking and other drugs leads to cancer, tension, stress, infections, etc. So if you're going to analyze this example, there are more than one dependent and independent variables. For independent variables, smoking and other drugs, while the dependent variables, cancer, tension, and chest infections, etc. So meaning more than one yung variables ng study. That's why complex hypothesis ang tawag sa kanya. Another one, unemployment and poverty illiteracy leads to crimes like, I don't know how to pronounce this one. So which means that ito yung unemployment at saka poverty and illiteracy, ito yung independent variables, meaning more than one independent variables. Ito naman leads to crimes. Ito siya specific example dito, more than one major variables. That's why complex hypothesis siya. So we have hypothesis based on the relationship among or between the variables. We have directional hypothesis. This hypothesis stipulates the direction of the expected differences or relationship. Directional hypothesis is a statement of conjuncture where the two variables of the study are expressed as having some relationship in a certain direction. Directional hypothesis siya, it's because the relationship of the variables is expressed directly. Meaning there's a direct assumption on the relationship between the variables. Halimbawa, there will be a positive relationship between extra coaching and academic achievement. So this example, it presents a positive relationship between the two variables in the study, which are extra coaching and academic achievement. Direct yung pagkaka-express ng relationship between the variables. Another one, non-directional hypothesis. Non-directional hypothesis predicts the relationship between the independent variable and dependent variable, but does not specify the directional of the relationship. Halimbawa, teacher-student relationship influence students' learning. Hindi siya, it did not express or present if what kind of influence, if positive or negative ba. So naman, there is no significant difference between 9th class boys and girls' abilities of learning values. Itong non-direct, ito naman siya, hindi in-specify if there's a direct relationship or direct difference between the learning moral values of the boys and girls. Usually sa research, ginagamit ay null hypothesis Null hypothesis yung ginagamit sa research. It's because the impression of null hypothesis is something that, ano ba, kanang ma-prove ba siya or dili. That's what I know. Why null hypothesis yung ginagamit. Kasi yung sa example dun sa mga quantitative studies dun sa program namin, null hypothesis usually yung ginagamit kasi challenge pa siya kung may significant relationship ba or wala. Ito, null hypothesis and research hypothesis. There is no statistically significant difference between the sample means of two groups, and you observe difference is the result of sampling error alone. So, itong null hypothesis, meaning there's no significant relationship doon sa variables na inyong study. Ito namang research hypothesis, meron siyang significant difference or significant relationship doon sa study ninyo, yung variables of your study. And so we have definition of terms. The important terms used in a study must be defined clearly. Some of these terms appear in the thesis title, statement of the problem, theoretical paradigm in the scope, and the limitation of the study. Ito, all parts in your research are connected. From the title, from the statement of the problem, scope and delimitation, theoretical framework, conceptual framework, lahat yan sila connected. So, the terms that are usually used in your study should be defined, especially the terms that can be seen in the title of your paper. And we have two ways in order to define the terms, conceptual and operational. Kasi conceptual definition conveys the general meaning of the concept such as might be found in a dictionary. It can reflect the framework used in a study. Itong conceptual framework usually can be found in a dictionary or in the related literature in your study. But when you define the terms in your study, it should be operational. Operational definition gives you the procedures or operations required to measure the concept. Meaning, paano ginamit yung term na yan sa study ninyo? Like this one. Ito. Since the title is Personality Traits and Game Design Preferences of Gamers in Davao City, there are three terms that should be defined in the study. The game design preferences, gamers in Davao City, at saka personality traits. And the arrangement of the terms should be in alphabetical. Game design preferences refers to the preferences of the gamers in Davao City in the art of playing design, applying design and aesthetics to create a game for entertainment or for educational, exercise, or experimental purposes, which can be analyzed by the mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics framework of Unique, LeBlanc, and Zubik, 2004. So meaning, it's very specific ng pagkaka-define ng game design preferences. As well as this one, the gamers in Davao City. It refers to the respondents of the study who are gamers currently reside in Davao City. Personality traits, again, there are a lot of personality traits that can be used for the study, but it should be specified. Refers the characteristic set of behaviors, cognition, and emotional factors possessed by the gamers in Davao City that can be determined by the 5-factor model of McRae and Costa, 1992. So that's how you're going to define the terms. Operational siya. Paano siya ginamit sa study ninyo? How these terms are being used for your research. So do you have questions, clarifications, for discussion? Klaro sa atua? I forgot to mention, yung mga descriptive studies lang, like for example, yung SOP lang is, nabawa ila dyan, what are the content marketing strategies used by the private schools in Davao City. Isang ano lang niya, hindi na siya need ng conceptual framework, theoretical framework na lang kasi walang relationship na i-correlate or isang variables lang yung study ninyo, which is yung content marketing strategy. And hindi na siya kailangan i-correlate sa other variable kasi yan, descriptive lang yung study ninyo. There's no need to provide conceptual framework for your research. Pero yung mga descriptive correlational, yung may mga comparative, kailangan siya ng conceptual framework in order to show the significant difference or significant relationship between the variables. Kagaya yun sa... Yes?
Tungama, sir, no? Kailangan po to, sir, no?
Yes, kailangan siya og conceptual framework kay i-compare man ninyo if na difference sa basis sa shopping based sa ilang gender o age bracket.
Sige, sir. Kita may theory para sa ito, ano, no? Sa brackets at ano, sir?
Dili lang, pangita lang mong related literature about ana, pero okay naman tong theory ninyo na tawag katong tawag
shopping experience.
Yung basis of shopping, online shopping. Basis of online shopping din siya. I-check lagi itong katong kang ina-genre na study katong effects of color kay the same mo og study na mag-differentiate mo sa effects or sa inyo is ang basis. I-differentiate niyo if naay kalahian ang based sa gender o sa age bracket. Pwede po sudugo na lang ninyo ang age. Diyon sa nila pag-label sa age bracket.
Sige, sir.
For example, inyo Dave, na ato'y conceptual framework kay i-test man ninyo ang inyong hypothesis kung naabay significant relationship ang literacy skills o ang computer literacy skills o ang software design preferences.
Sige, sir.
Inyo ila-just mean kay naato'y conceptual framework inyo it's because identify ninyo if there's significant relationship between math anxiety o ang academic performance nila sa mathematics na subject. Which means dapat na ay conceptual framework na may logical relationship, i-test pa man ninyo ang relationship or inyong hypothesis. Inyo Glyze, wala na to'y conceptual framework kay lang man mo, descriptive lang man mo. You just want to determine what are the learning experiences of the students sa online class. Wala man mo ilang i-correlate ato sa yung study. No need to provide conceptual framework, theoretical framework na lang. Sa inyong tiya, wala, dili na mo need conceptual kay mag-descriptive lang man mo. Just want to determine yung mga motives ba to inyo or purposes?
Yes. Kuan sir, katong wait lang Sinapod to akong
purpose
lista.
na yung intentions mo ba to?
Ay katong kuan sir, intentions.
O intentions. I-identify lang man yung intentions.
Okay sir.
Sir, na ay variables ang math performance. Wala na need ang math performance. No need to provide kay naman siya. Ang grade naman sa mathematics. Bale, academic performance man to, di ba? Ang general concept. Specific na ang math performance. Kay dili man pwede gamiton ang grades sa other subjects. Kay dili man siya related sa math. Like for example, sa English, Filipino, dili man illogical siya if i-correlate nimo siya sa mathematics inside. It's because wala man siya math concepts sa sa English o Filipino. Ang nalamay math concepts, math o science, di ba? Pero mas logical siya kung sa mathematics lang ang specific na subject para sa academic performance. Napay question? Ang katong ano sa specific variables sa inyong study mo itong indicator sa like for example sa software design. So itong mga software designs katong computer literacy skills o sa man itong mga specific indicators sa computer literacy skills. You need to express that in your conceptual framework. Forget?
Yes, sir. That's
Okay na ta? So do you have more questions?
wala na,
Clarification
sir.
pa? Ha? Unsa? Wala na?
Sa mga sir, dili na kayo.
Oh, dili na kailangan nyo kay descriptive lang man to inyo ha. Just want to identify the content marketing strategies of the private schools, Davao City. Pero dili na to content analysis inyo ha dyan ha. Mag-survey na mo. Dili na content analysis inyo ha.
Yes,
Diba
sir.
yung gibuhat kay content analysis man to. Kuha mo mga corpora, database sa mga post sa katong Davao Food Guide karon kay mag-interview na jud mo sa kinsa man tong personal sa school na naka-assign ana. Mag-ask mo og help kay Sir Arvin unsaon na niyo pag-communicate sa sa personnel sa school.
Yes, sir.
Okay, questions? Clarifications? I think that's it.